This is a production of Cornell University.
So here we go. Welcome, everyone, to week 4 of our lockdown here in New York State and in the Northeast. Most of us are not really talking about any release from this until the 29th. And so always like to find a good picture. I know not everybody likes dogs at turf, but, you know, you just can't help but looking at Buck here and thinking that, boy, it's going to be okay. Again, as a member of Cornell University and citizens of the United States of America and people sitting around listening to me, I tweeted this out. It's the editorial director for the New York Times. I thought put something together that's really important for all of us. I try to promote that. That's one of the reasons we're doing it, is to get us all together, even if it's just to think about turf, that there's a greater situation going on, just to remind us of that while we distract ourselves for the next 30 minutes or so. If you'd like to read about some of the things we talk about, or you just can't watch a video, you'd rather do your morning constitutional with a 2-pager newsletter. We've been writing it for 21 years. The 3rd issue is out. If you'd like it, you can contact Carl about getting on the subscription list. I urge you to continue to check on updates that are affecting us nationally, at the state level and at the local level. And so you have the GCSA nationally, you've got the Met superintendents and GCSA NY, and we'll be doing a symposium with them next week. But the Met GCSA has their website here, and a number of these links are live and great to connect to for things that are important for golf in New York State. And of course, with the metropolitan New York area being the epicenter of the situation, more critical for everybody down there. So let's take a little walk through the time period. In the 4 weeks we've been doing this, I started doing this one last week. So last week on April 7th, there were 13 states that did not allow golf. And now there's 15 states. When we met last week on Wednesday in New York allowed golf, and now golf appears to be under state order, temporarily closed. Well, one of the things that's a reality of life now, as we're closed, or if we're open and still maintaining, or even if we're closed and maintaining, no matter what, we're having to manage the logistics of sanitation and keeping the staff safe, and that takes time. You've got to, where are the touch points? How is it working? Are we cleaning it? Are we testing it? Are we splitting shifts? Are we moving guys around so that if one guy gets it, especially in the New York metropolitan area where a lot of crews are being impacted by this? You know, obviously this takes time to do, so it's part of your standard operating procedures now. Now, big shout out to Zach Nicoludis, who must be a new green section agronomist in the central region, took over for my old pal Bob Vavrick in the Midwest. And he wrote this article about what golfers should expect from reduced golf course maintenance. And he really didn't discriminate between whether you were open or not open. I pulled a couple of quotes out of this like I did last week. I really like how Adam Miller and the guys with the USGA are starting to really come out and evolve the message here, right? I think talking to golfers and giving superintendents things they can tell, especially your discriminating golfers. Listen, some of your rank and file golfers just want to get out there. They'll be like, okay, we'll give you a little time to get it into shape. Depends on when we get started, right? Depends on how many guys you lost. There's always going to be this sort of thing we don't know, right? But if you're out there and you're scheduling things, you know, it's good to remind golfers. Maybe they might see you out there when they don't normally see you because they're at reduced staff that's got to be scattered. And if they're playing, obviously it's even more potential contact. Now, Jamie Robb is the golf course superintendent at the Marine Club out in Vancouver, British Columbia. And he did a tweet this past week that I'm assuming created quite a bit of discussion about being closed and what he felt was opening the golf course, putting the staff at risk, right? So Jamie came out pretty strong about this, and I think I'd encourage you to look at that and see the thread that's going on there. There's obviously many aspects to this, but at the end of the day, we're grown grass, right? You got to maintain a golf course, politics, all the other things about the things going on. But ultimately, there's grass growing, there's plants growing, there's sand, there's everything, right? If there's no play, theoretically, you should have more time, even if sanitation takes a little bit of time, right? Here's my old pal Mount Nelson stuck in a bunker at Pacific Dunes. Well, the parts of the course that are really only maintained for play are setting it up, changing cups, setting tees, emptying garbage, and bunkers. I talked to a couple superintendents the last few days. They're like, yeah, I have half the staff. I have 30% of the staff, but I don't have to set the place up for play. So right now I can still prioritize and keep the greens in halfway decent shape. And I can raise the height in other places. And maybe the detail work isn't getting done, right? And maybe we're not going to have that flower bed this year, right? So there's parts of the way labor's shaking out that's really interesting. And of course, what's adding to that, in my opinion, that's helping everybody in the Northeast is the weather is in a bit of a stall. So let's take a little launch through the weather here. This is from our forecast website that we maintain through our turfgrass program. This is the 2-inch soil temperatures on March 30th, right? You can see we're barely in the 50s in the New York metropolitan area and well into the 30s in upstate New York for much of it. Right? And then the scale changes a little bit. You see the 50s start to creep in last week into the metropolitan New York area and up the Hudson Valley. And you see, but again, a lot of New York State still in the 30s and 40s. And here's this week. This was Monday of this week. And you're barely in the 50s in central Jersey. So again, if labor's tight, you're making decisions on mowing, growth regulators, pests, and things like that. Soil temperature. Well, let me commend another resource to you, right? If this isn't part of your library of resources as a golf course superintendent, I don't know how you manage turfgrass diseases in the world to a certain extent. This is for all intents and purposes, and is the Bible of what I think is the best thinking we have about cultural and chemical management of turfgrass diseases. And if you look at two of the big ones in the spring, that are related to soil temperature. The thing that's critical to understand is it's not just when the soil temperature gets to a certain temperature, it's that it persists at that temperature, right? So you want to be mindful of, okay, well, I'm at 55, I got to go. Wait, whoa. Let's see, right? Because then you see, it also determines you're going to need another application. If you got a history of this, there's a couple of ways to go. Fairways and rough, well, maybe it's time. I don't know. It goes. I don't know. But if you're going to do it, even your models aren't saying you're there yet. How about what's coming for the week? Well, let's look back a couple of weeks at the forecast for the previous week. And you can see we were in single-digit growing degree days. Last week, you could see there were double-digit growing degree days, but still not very many. And this week, you can see the majority of the Northeast, at least for the next 5 days, is going to have very low degree day accumulation, even in the metro New York area. So, you're at a time now where you can put policies and practices into place because you're not dedicating most of your staff to mowing yet, right? Don't rush out and start mowing. As soon as you get on a mowing schedule, right, you're going to wind up having to keep it up. So maybe a cleanup mow and take it easy. I'm talking to guys even on Long Island they're not that far along. So let's not rush it. We still got all that information we talked about at the very beginning about plant growth regulators, right? Remind ourselves, how much can grass grow when the average temperature is barely 50 degrees, right? It can't grow very much. Now you can warm it up, cut it lower, put dark things on it, put pigments on it. But why would you do that right now, especially if you don't have play? Now, a wonderful opportunity to promote our pal and Cornell grad Doug Soldat's spreadsheet for monitoring clipping volume that you can find at the Wisconsin-Madison Turfgrass Program website. You can download it. Really straightforward method of looking at the various ways of trying to determine volume, maintain your 30% mow, right? Mow at 30, mow 30. Don't take off more than 30%. If you set your greens to 187, right? The 33% lets you mow them when they're 280. Now, we're going to talk to John in a minute about whether we think we're going to go that high. But if we're following the 1/3 rule and you start to think about it in those terms, you start to see if that's what's, keeps growth at a minimum by following the 1/3 rule, then, and I raise my height, theoretically, I should be able to go out more frequently. Now, let's wrap it up before we start talking with John. Our regular update on annual bluegrass weevil. Ben McGraw said just the other day, Western Pennsylvania's not fully emerged. Expect peak early to mid next week. So we're talking about another week until we start to see adults. So if you're on an adulticide application, maybe it's time to keep scouting and getting out there. And I think we should revisit this topic again next week and talk more about it, because of places where ABW is a problem, you're making 5.5, 6 applications of insecticide a year to get this pest under control. So it's certainly worthy of continued conversation. Back to Zach. And as we make our transition to the conversation with John, again, what a great job Jack did here with this picture that he used in the front of the article. Again, commend this USGA article to you. A really nice progressive look at sort of what's going on and how to talk about it with golfers. And all of us know when the grass starts growing, this is exactly what's going to happen. And so he leaves us with a really nice quote, much like the other USGA article did too. Really big shout out to superintendents that have already begun to adapt. Listen, this is something we're good at as a profession. You're not a good golf course superintendent if you can't think on your feet, if you can't problem solve, if you can't adapt. The big issue is you have to put a program and policy into place. Sometimes our operations are often a little sloppy because, we cut corners and we put things together with baling twine. This is a chance where, that baling twine ain't going to work. You're going to have fewer things to deal with, and you're going to have to be more strategic about how you use those resources. And so let's start with, ultimately, again, the mowing discussion. And in that article, Zach talks about the role that rolling plays. And, John's done a lot of work in this area, managing bentgrass greens in the transition zone, where to reduce stress, John, if I've got the discussion right, to reduce stress, you're recommending, skipping mowing and rolling. And obviously by reducing stress, not only do you keep them alive, but maybe you need less fungicides. Maybe you need less water. Maybe you need less nitrogen. I don't want to presume to know the cascade of benefits, but because they're clear, and you and I have talked about them on, the Frankly Speaking podcast, and you've been around and published on these things. But here's the questions for the COVID situation, right? A lot of people are raising their heights of cut. A lot of guys are going to go, to be honest, going to 130 is raising the height of cut on many golf courses nowadays. Going to 150 or 180 is becoming popular. If we're raising the height of cut, John, and I can get across the golf course faster with a roller than I can with mowing, should I do it for less stress?
Definitely. We've been doing that since 2002, 2003, looking at it, and for multiple years. So we've got almost 18 years of data looking at it. And, we've done all sorts of mowing heights, from going at 0.080 to 1/10 of an inch to 115, 125. The highest we've gone is 5/32 of an inch. So 156, but, going from 125 to 156, an 1/8 of an inch to 5/32 of an inch, and mowing daily at an 1/8 of an inch, and using that as the kind of the standard. So that's, what are your speeds when you mow at an 1/8 of an inch? We can alternate mowing and rolling at 5/32 of an inch with one of these speed rollers, whether it's a DMI or a true surface or a true turf. And we can actually increase the speeds by about 4 to 6 inches by raising the mowing height. But 4 to 6 inches, when you look at it's not realistically, study done at Michigan State by Karcher and Nikolai showed that a golfer can't tell that difference. But if we roll daily and we mow 3 times a week, we can actually increase the green speed at 5/32 of an inch by 1.5 feet over an 1/8 of an inch. And then going back to what you're saying is this stress and reducing the number of the times that it takes to mow. And I look at it as whether it's a shade stress or a heat stress or whatever the stress is, as long as you're not exceeding that 1/3 rule by mowing. So maybe you need to use a plant growth regulator when it's actively growing. You're wounding that plant when you cut it. So if it's heat stress or if it's shade stress and that plant can't produce enough carbohydrates, it takes energy to heal that wound. So if you're reducing that, cutting that in half, just the ability of that plant to, photosynthate and accumulate carbohydrates is going to be a lot better. Just that skipping.
Perfect. So is it possible to use rolling then to reduce overall maintenance, not just mowing? So in addition to maintaining the performance, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you're maintaining the performance, you're not cutting as much. And now, you see minimal maintenance programs, John, that are saying twice a week, 3 times a week. So if we don't want to violate the 1/3 rule, I'm sure in your neck of the woods where we're going to be in another month, they have to use growth regulators if they're going to mow that infrequently. Yes?
Yes, definitely. Because we're in the conditions where now growth is perfect for bent grass. Our daytime and nighttime temperatures are, at that 50% or whatever. We're at peak growth right now. And yeah, so the primo applications or the new applications are going out to control that. And they can still be alternate. They're not mowing every day. Some of the top clubs. Now this is specific for bent and Poa greens. I wouldn't do this for Bermuda greens.
You would not, because we're talking about bent and Poa greens, right? So
Right.
bent and Poa greens, do you think, is it reasonable now that you're in that perfect bent grass growing period? It's not too hot that even the Poa is crapping out. So some of the Poa is probably still doing okay where you are. If you let's say you went to 5/32, 157, right?
Yeah.
And you're using a growth regulator, and the 1/3 rule takes you almost to 180. I gotta believe it takes you to over 180, close to 0.2.
Right.
I can do that and roll, and see, to me, I want to roll fast. I'm trying to save as much time. Triplex mowing, some guys aren't putting buckets on. You seeing guys not putting buckets on?
No, we're always putting buckets on greens for sure.
And because they're playing.
Yeah, because they're playing. Yeah, because we're playing. I think the time saving and the money savings is huge. We did an economic impact of that, and it showed, including the cost of buying the rollers. If you're a golf course, like a public golf course, it's going to cost you an extra $80 a year if you do this alternating mowing and rolling practice. And it's going to cost you an extra $80 a year to purchase that mower. So at the end of the year, it's
eight oh.
yeah, $80. That includes purchasing the rollers. Now, if you're on the other end of that spectrum is if you're a private golf club in Tennessee, because we broke it down for public, private, and triplex versus walk mow. Because they pay different in some of the things for their people that work on the greens. You get paid more at a private club on clubs that walk mow greens. We have bigger budgets and they can afford to hire their hourly workers, right?
That's right.
So if you're an 18-hole golf facility that walk mows greens in Tennessee, and you alternate mowing and rolling through the season on your bent grass, you can save as much as $22,000 a year. Now this is old data,
right?
From the 06, 07, $22,000 a year on your budget.
Okay.
Just because it's so much faster to go out and roll the greens with 2 speed rollers than it is to have the average of 5 people walk mowing greens.
Okay, so what about now that most have abandoned walk mowing and have gone to triplex? You've done some economics of triplexing too, right?
Yeah, so they still save money. They're still saving money on that as well at the private club level. They're still saving. I can't remember what the numbers are on that, but it's into the thousands.
So because a lot of guys are moving to some of the newer triplexes. There's a number of them on the market that are giving, other than the stripe, giving a hand mow quality cut. At least that's what I hear. You see the cutting units are getting aggressive again on these units. So my question is, if we don't have play, so I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit.
Okay.
We don't have play, and you saw the weather. We're in a stall. If you had to plan, I'm giving you hindsight, right? You know what you know now, and it's about to be here in a month. What would you plan to do if you knew you had half to a third of the staff you normally did, and you didn't really want to skimp on your greens, but even just 2 guys mowing 18 greens or 27 greens or 19 greens, whatever, takes a lot of time, and I don't know how long this is going to go. So what would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question because before you came on, Carl and I were talking. We have an email thread that goes around because for the people that have Bermuda greens here in Tennessee, and we're actually getting down to a frost, and people are like, "Are you covering your greens or are you not?" And one of the comments was a person saying it came out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. The superintendent saying, "I'm not covering because I want to set back because we were in the 80s last week." Um, so the Bermuda's up and going. He goes, "We're not allowed to play golf, so I want to shock my Bermuda grass so it stops and slows down growing." So we can cut that maintenance practice. Yeah, like anything, we're doing. Budgets are being cut. Don't put your pre-emerge on your rough this year because your everything's being cut. But focus on your greens. Dedicate the greens. But my mentality, my thought philosophy is whether you're in a budget crisis or weather crisis, rolling is more important on bent grass greens as it is mowing. And I think your rolling frequencies should be more than your mowing frequencies any time of the year. And that's
Well,
just my take.
that's a perfect way to segment the questions, Carl. We getting any questions?
Yeah, so Dave is asking a question basically to that effect, John. He's saying for courses that aren't open for play and already have these restrictions and staff, maybe they can only mow 3 to 4 times a week as it is. Is there a benefit to adding rolling? And it's essentially, I'm only going to be able to cut greens 3 times a week. Is there something that rolling is going to get me, those other 3 or 4 days a week?
Definitely. It's going to get you more speed, more trueness, and more consistency. And if you can do it, if you can roll a minimum of 3 times a week, during dollar spot pressure, I mean, studies year after year are showing it cuts that down by 50 to 80% the
Right.
pressure for
So
disease.
what about no play? No play. If he's mowing 3 times a week, could he go to once or twice a week and just roll?
See, that's a good question. I would, yes, but if there's no play at all, yeah, I would still want to get those rollings in just to keep the disease pressure down. Because, some of that, if you can reduce your fungicide applications and maybe not have to do like the chlorthalonil, but maybe just do the systemic, the cheaper systemics or something. Those are some of the things I would consider. And I don't know about 2 times a week, but 3 times, alternating mowing and rolling. Yeah, you could do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and if it's cool enough, you can only maybe get away with 2 mowings a week. I don't know.
Right now we are.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I would mow Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and mow Tuesday and Thursday if your course is not open. That's just like in cool climates for sure. If you're not getting the growth.
So I had a question, John. We were talking about, and Frank was mentioning it earlier with some mowers and the striping and the aggressiveness of cut. I know you've done some research over the years on how you set the mower up and how that affects maybe the height of cut versus bench height and quality of cut. Is there anything people should be thinking about right now, especially without play and restrictions, and how they're going to set the mower up?
Not too much. It's just more of the mowing height. And I mean, a lot of people, when they're getting into that craze of lowering mowing heights, we're adjusting the behind center distance and getting a lower effective height of cut. We did studies on that and just shows that the more aggressive you're spinning that reel before you actually cut that blade, it's like a jab, jab, jab punch instead of a jab, jab punch. You're picking up more sand. You're not really getting more clippings, but you're causing more stress. So the factory settings, basically, the engineers have figured it out. So the factory settings are where you should keep my opinion, your behind center distances for sure. Also, to talk about the triplex, the people that are the new triplex mowers, they cut just as good as the walking mowers. The challenge is at the private clubs when they see someone triplexing versus walking, the members think, "What are you doing cutting corners?" So it's an education thing. And it's also, you got to make sure you have the turnarounds, the places that, that's one of the challenges why people like the walking pedestrian mower is, they can put a lattice down, spin on if there's a bunker close to the.
What about I thought I remember you and Tom doing a study looking at the speed roller versus the triplex based roller, right? Because if I've got a triplex based roller and a triplex that I'm mowing with, and I just play games back and forth, even without play, there's a part of me that's convinced if I don't wound that plant, rolling's better than mowing. If it's not growing very much and I don't have to wound it for any reason, rolling is a way to just sort of keep things smooth and neutralized, even if nobody's on them. I mean, that's sort of the general way I'm thinking about it. Is that a good way to think about it?
That's a great way to think about it. Exactly.
And then what about triplex rollers?
Triplex rollers are great. You know, you don't have to buy another piece of equipment, but it's time to swap it back and forth, but it's not that much time. So those are great. And they also come with the ones that have the vibratory rollers, which we found are really effective at helping incorporate sand top dressing after you've brushed. So rolling after top dressing, after you've brushed it in, helps, but the vibratory runs really help shake it down even deeper.
Carl, more questions?
Yeah, John Lobenstein's got a really good question. He's asking about reducing disease pressure, rolling versus just removing dew. Is there an advantage to the rolling over just the dew removal?
Yeah, and Paul Giordano at Michigan State, I think, did some work on that for his PhD, and he showed that it had a greater benefit by rolling than just going and dew whipping alone. Because one is the dew whipping, you're removing the guttation water, but he found something microbially that's happening at the crown that helps reduce that disease. So yes, the rolling is definitely a better, they're both good practices, but the rolling is definitely going to reduce your disease by a lot.
It appears from Paul's work that the compression up at the top is altering, he's speculating that it's altering moisture content. It's keeping it more uniform in a way that is either suppressing the existing pathogen or enhancing, antagonizing plant defenses or other microbes. There's definitely something weird going on, but it's not just for dollar spot. It's pink snow, it's microdochium patch, it's moss in some ways. There's been, I've showed in high cut turf, you walk, you ride on it, you don't get crabgrass in it. So, I've always argued that there's something about the imposition of that force that's triggering the plant to defend itself, but that doesn't seem as bad as mowing it, where, like you say, you're physiologically creating a wound, which has a different cascade of defense mechanisms than maybe just being slightly compressed.
Right. I think it'd be interesting to analyze plants after rolling and stuff, the things like we do for nutrition, for secondary metabolites that we look at in kale and those types of crops. And are those things being triggered when you do that? And defense mechanisms of the plant. I guess.
That's right. Carl, questions before we get John out of here?
Just one last question. Rich is asking, since we have John here, he was thinking probably about soil physical properties. He's asking about the Air 2G versus something like the Vertidrain with a kick action. Do you have any experience with that, John? And what do you think about that machine?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work years ago with the Air 2G2, and I haven't compared it to the Vertidrain with the kick action side by side. What we did find with the Air 2G2 is it actually immediately after doing it, it increased green speeds. I almost looked like it was like waving like a bed sheet. It picks up and then it settles it down. But in very poorly drained areas, it increased our infiltration drainage rates by about 20 to 40%, but it's very short-lived. It's gone after a week. But, if you've got, we just had 4 inches of rain the other day. That would have been a good time to go out in some of the high drained areas to get them to drain faster with the Air 2G2, where you couldn't drive a tractor with the Vertidrain over it. The Vertidrain is going to impact more and do more physical changes long-term with the kick action, especially. I think you'll see a longer-term benefit from that.
So you think there's a longer-term benefit from the kick of the Vertidrain than there is even for what your data is showing with the Air 2G?
Yeah, so the Air 2G2, we haven't seen any I guess effects beyond a week after doing it. It kind of seems to settle back in because the air just kind of compresses back down. Whereas at the Vertidrain, you got multiple tines going in and closer spacings. And then if they're kicking, they're physically altering that soil in a different manner that the air is just kind of doing it.
Yeah, but this is off the topic. And Carl, since we got him, I'm going to bug him about it. Last week we had Rock Gassois on our sports turf discussion, and we were talking about cultivation around these sorts of issues. And, one of the things I like, and we've started to do, is this targeted cultivation. And on a golf course, you're talking about walk-on, walk-off areas, areas, you don't need to do the whole stupid fairway. If there's 3 places you can go. And this particular device, you send the guy out once a week to go do these areas, it becomes feasible in some ways if there's 5 of them. It takes them, a couple hours to drag this thing around. And
Right.
even if it's every couple of weeks, right? If it gives you this alleviation, sometimes that's all grass needs is just a little bit of a leg up to then get a little bit better, especially fighting a 4-inch rain.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, people that have the Air 2 G2, I said, like in the afternoon thing, start on 18 and have your guy girl walk from 18 back to 10 and someone on 9. And that part where they go on and off the cart path all the time, let's say where the carts go off and it continually gets compacted. If you can keep doing that and be preventative, that's a good tool. Site-specific management, like you're saying.
Perfect. Carl.
One last question just came in here. It's about putting the baskets on the mower for greens. We've talked a little bit about taking them on, leaving them off, and the positives and negatives there. John, you got anything to speculate? I guess early in the season maybe is a little different than in the heat of the season.
I guess I would just be cautious of the organic matter buildup that's going to occur on that surface if it's a good sand-based green. I mean, if they're not growing very fast, and if you can get a green, it's not that much time to empty the buckets. I don't know. That'd be one I'd be wary of returning the clippings, because we're always battling, from sand top dressing, clarification, that reducing that organic matter accumulation, and just removing those clippings is one of the keys.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because that takes me down the Dan Donnelly wormhole where he's thinking about not wanting to top dress, and he's talking about how this, just organic matter, he's using buckets too, and just the plant senesces and loses tissue all the time. And generally we think, grass leaf blades don't contribute as much to organic matter, but the volume of tissue that gets laid down could lead to it over time. So you're arguing, put the buckets on, don't create another problem, and focus on reducing growth by making sure not much comes up. And we've been talking, PGRs with Kreuzer and Soldat the last several weeks. So you should be dialed in on how to do that. I'm assuming a lot of your guys in Tennessee are doing that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you're right, because there's very little carbon in the leaves compared to the rhizomes or the stolons. I guess the stolons of the bentgrass, or even the roots that are accumulating. So, but anything you can be doing to dilute that is key, I think.
That's exactly right.
And the other thing is just that we're mowing, we're waiting a little bit longer between mowings now, and the leaf blades you're actually mowing off are going to be bigger. They're probably not going to settle in. It's
going to be harder to break them down and get them to work in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So keep the growth down. Rolling might have some help. There's Doug. What's Doug saying?
Doug's just mentioning, when you return those clippings, again, you're adding nitrogen back into the system, stimulating growth, and you got more growth to deal with. So maybe a little bit of a circle chasing your tail.
We got all the rock stars here today. Is Buckley on there? Hopefully nothing happens.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is.
Anyway, are we good, Carl? Thanks, everybody. John, thanks so much for joining us. So great to see you.
Thank you for wearing the UT orange hat. I appreciate you wearing the UT orange.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, John.
All right, see you guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.